I will start and then
Okay, so I will give you this one. I will turn around.
So fancy, yeah?
And you can hold it. Oh, okay, wait.
I'll put it in my pockets. Yeah, thank you.
This, okay.
And
Thank you.
and you launch the presentation. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you are enjoying the conference. My name is Miguel Fernandez. I'm originally from Bolivia. I work in Germany, in Leipzig, in the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, and I'm here on behalf of all my colleagues, Luisa, Christian, Néstor, and our boss, Henrique Pereira, who unfortunately is teaching a class and was not able to attend in person, but I'm sure he's online. So today, what we would like to do is have a session where we hear your contributions and ideas on a concept that the Group on Earth Observations, Biodiversity Observation Network, has been developing. This concept is supposed to be the framework for biodiversity monitoring at global scale and has been already developed conceptually. But the problem is, how do we make this transition from conceptual to application and implementation? So over the past few years, Henrique's lab and Néstor have been developing this idea of the EBV cubes, the Essential Biodiversity Variable data cubes. This is a data standard and a metadata standard that has been using the climate community ACCD climate convention for sharing information on essential biodiversity variables. So today we would like to hear your thoughts on these ideas and perhaps think together, how do we move forward? So with that, I will leave Néstor the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Yeah, my name is Nestor Fernandez. I am a research scientist at iDiv. I also am co-lead of the GeoBond working group on data. And what I'm going to introduce you is a little bit where we come from in terms of why we need a standard for the essential biodiversity variables, not only a standard for metadata, but also a standard for data. And then we would like to have, after this presentation, a discussion with you, an open discussion. So maybe you can help us to understand if this is something interesting for the TDWG community, how can we connect with other initiatives, and how can we actually make bridges with other communities that we are also involved with, such as, for example, Geo. So for those that are not familiar with the concept of essential biodiversity variables, the idea of the essential biodiversity variables is to mainstream biodiversity information on states of biodiversity over time in a way that is consistent across different regions of the world, but also across different dimensions of biodiversity. I'm showing this here as a 3-steps vision in the building of essential biodiversity variables. The first step is mobilize primary observations for monitoring programs. This is something that all of you are familiar with, of course, because this is kind of the scope of many of the standards that are discussed in the biodiversity community. Second, similarly, also harmonize, integrate, and model those observations in order to fill gaps, and those are, for example, spatial gaps, temporal gaps, and also try to deal with some of the biases that usually we find in those observations. And finally, distribute spatiotemporal cubes of information in a way that they can be directly used for informing on biodiversity change. And those are important, for example, for reporting in relation to the targets of the CBD, of the Convention for Biological Diversity, but also on national level targets, And more, we think that they are important also for spatial planning of conservation. A little bit of this summary is represented in this figure. Usually, essential biodiversity variables data cubes are result from the integration of many different sources of primary data, often many different sources of primary data. And since we cannot cover all the space and all time with those observations, usually we'll need some kind of spatiotemporal predictors in order to model those data cubes. This is an approach that GeoBon has been working for many years already. I'll show in the next slide 3 examples of how this is done. And GeoBon is also developing the EBV data portal, which aims to mainstream those data sets. So here are 3 examples on the complexity of this endeavor. The idea is to have comparable data outputs across different EBV classes. Those are classes related to ecosystems, classes related to species. I'll go to that in a minute. In a way that we can actually compare, we can actually use data in a similar manner, whether it is for ecosystem structure. And for example, there is this paper by Ruben Balbuena and colleagues on standardizing ecosystem morphological traits from remote sensing, 3D remote sensing, to produce essential biodiversity variables data. For species populations, there have been quite a lot of work on developing essential biodiversity variables for mapping and monitoring distributions and abundances of populations based on this concept of modeling and projecting species information. And also there has been some work, it's not so advanced, but for example, in species traits, identifying what are the EBVs for species traits and how, like, kind of designing or starting to think about how those EBV products would look like. So the big complexity we have here is that we are in reality addressing many different dimensions of biodiversity, and we are trying to bring the data on those different dimensions of biodiversity in a consistent way. If we can look at biodiversity in 2 main ways, let's say, so we can look here horizontally at the spatial variability and temporal variability of organisms, such as, for example, species populations, also species traits, or genetic composition of species populations, etc. But also we can look vertically to the different components of biodiversity in an aggregated way, such as, for example, how are communities structured, or what are the emerging properties that arise at the ecosystem level, such as functions. So GeoBon has cataloged all that variability of information in different EBV classes, genetic composition, species populations, traits, ecosystem structure, function, and community composition. And for each of them, we have identified essential biodiversity variables that are critical to monitor biodiversity change. So in terms of data, this is very challenging to handle because we are speaking about different dimensions of biodiversity, but in each of these dimensions also, we are addressing different entities. So when we are measuring the EBV on species populations, we need to do it for a collection of different species. And we should organize the data in a similar way as if we are speaking about, for example, ecosystems. If we are looking at the vertical profile of different ecosystems, we need to do it also taking into account classifications of ecosystems. This is exactly what the EBV cube standard that we are proposing aims to address. This is not a new problem. Ecologists, biodiversity scientists, remote sensing communities have been working on this for a long time. The problem is that the data has been structured in many different ways. So there is no kind of one single way of structuring this data. Yeah. So what we aim to do with the EBV cube is try to organize all that information. So for example, when we have many different biological entities of species, ecosystems, types of communities, to organize it in a similar way, no matter what region of the world you are looking at or what group of species. Very often, we also have different scenarios that result in metrics for those essential biodiversity variables. For example, one of the scopes of the essential biodiversity variables is projecting to the future what is going to be biodiversity change But usually you have different kind of scenarios, like climate scenarios, land use scenarios, and they produce different outputs. Yeah. So how we organize that information as well. And then also we are dealing with different biodiversity metrics. For example, if we are speaking about community composition, there are many different, as you are all aware, many different metrics. Those can be alpha diversity, beta diversity, dissimilarity indexes, etc. How can we put the information in a way that one data set can be compared or can be combined with another data set? So 3 basic principles. All of you are very well aware of this, but just to repeat this. First of all, we are aiming for consistent metadata. No matter whether you're speaking about species or ecosystems, we need to have the same metadata schema. Second, also, no matter what kind of data sets we are producing, it should be interoperable in the sense that it could be combined with other similar data sets in order to create biodiversity indicators, for example, and then monitor biodiversity change from those. And finally, of course, we need to facilitate access. So the EBBCube standard is a specification of the NetCDF standard, where we defined a unified hierarchical structure for organizing those scenarios, metrics, etc. And why we used NetCDF, Miguel already pointed to it, is because it is a standard that is widely used in other communities, especially in the geo community, in the Open Geospatial Consortium, and it is a very well-known standard for organizing spatial explicit data, for example, for climate and other Earth observations. So what we are doing is to specify the structure of this NetCDF together with a minimum information specification, which uses ACDD terms. Those are the metadata standard of the Attribute Convention for Data Discovery. Since ecological communities are usually using EML, we are also creating a dictionary that translates ECDD terms into EML. So this NetCDF, which we call the EBBCube standard, is self-described in the sense that all the metadata information is packed within the EBBCube, and it is compliant with the FAIR principles, and something that is important in our community, it is compliant with the GEOS, the Group of Earth Observations Data Management Principles. And for that, we are also working together with them in the GEO Data Working Group. So this is kind of an outline of the structure. Usually in the EBBCube, you have variables and dimensions. The dimensions of the cube are entities. So those are, for example, different species, but they can be also different ecosystem types, or they can be different community names. Yeah. Second dimension is, well, the 2 dimensions of space, and finally time. So the cube is a 4th-dimensional data structure that then contains several variables that defines a scenario, and then you can have metrics for different scenarios within the same EBBCube. In this way, you have all the information packed in one single file. Okay. As I said before, the metadata is embedded here in the NetCDF cube, and basically it makes reference to 7 main groups of terms. Each of those are kind of broken down into different metadata terms. So a group of them is about attribution, a second group is about publication, and one thing that we are already doing is to provide the capacity to publish the data by providing DOIs. Yeah, so any user that want to upload EBBCube in the GeoBond data portal that I will show in a minute can directly get a DOI, so the data set is directly citable. A third group is about history and processing level of the data set. Fourth is about geospatial and temporal attributes. Fifth, about the data itself. So what is the data provenance? And this is one of the discussions we would like to have with you today, how to improve the description of data provenance, and also what processing has been done to the data, what models have been used, etc. And finally, there's those are terms that are already there in the attribute convention for data discovery. What we are doing is specifying how those terms should be filled. And finally, there is a group of what we call the EBV terms, terms of the essential biodiversity variables, that makes reference to biodiversity attributes. Those are the class of essential biodiversity variable, name, entities that are in there, what is scenario and metrics descriptions, and so on. Okay, so this metadata standard, data metadata standards, goes very closely together with an infrastructure we are developing here, which is the EBV data portal. Christian.langer here in the table is one of our IDs, or working on the catalog of the essential biodiversity variables. And what this infrastructure does is digest the information contained in the netcdf EBV cube and then catalog that information. Those data sets are consistently structured across thematic, spatial, and temporal dimensions, also consistently documented, so the EBV portal is able to read the information from the netcdf and then provide that information to the user in a friendly way. And finally, we aim for traceability of the data sets, both in terms of what resources have been used to develop those data sets, but also about the production pipelines. A bit of more technical aspects. So as I said before, we are developing also translations between the attributes, the metadata that is contained in the EBV cube with EML in a way that, for example, in the future, we could directly connect with Data One or with other initiatives such as, for example, ELTR, they are directly developing platforms that can ingest EML, and actually we are working together with them to be able to make connections with the EBV portal. Also, we have been developing JSON resources in order to be able to communicate through server applications. And then something that we would like to discuss today also is how to implement taxonomies. And we are speaking in reality about different taxonomies, because we are speaking not only about the species, but also ecosystem types, etc., which is extremely challenging for us. Luise is here in the table also. She presented yesterday briefly her poster. She has developed the R package called EBV Cube, which allows users to easily create those data structures from TIFF layers, for example. And we are now in the process also of developing a QGIS plugin to do it in a GIS environment also. Okay, if you want to see the EBV portal, please go to portal.geobon.org. You'll find there already something around 20, 25 datasets, can it be? We are now in the process of trying to mobilize a large amount of datasets. We expect to present the current status in the next CBD COP, and for them, we would like to have at least duplicate the number of datasets, and your input will be very welcome. And just a final acknowledgement slide. This project started with GeoBon within the data working group with funds from GeoBon. It has continued with the eShape project, which is funded by the European Commission. Now it is funding is continued also under the Europa One project, and also iDiv and the German Foundation, German Research Foundation is providing some funds. Okay, so this is my presentation. The next part of the symposium, we'd like to have an open discussion with you. There are four main questions, or three main questions, and those are broken down in several other questions. Miguel will introduce those questions in a minute. One of them is, how can we mainstream the EBV Cube standard, and how can we get benefit from this community, from other communities to evolve from here? How can we network with other relevant standards? And finally, maybe we can have some discussion about this work that has been done mostly within the geo environment, how can we start connecting better with the TDWG community? So yeah, thank you. And yeah, Miguel, if you want to present the questions.
Thank you so much, Néstor. So what I would like to do now in the second part of this session is move to a much more dynamic exercise where we take questions, input from the participants of the session. And to allow for remote participants to also provide feedback, we have created a Jamboard link that is going to be shared by my colleagues on Zoom, and we will put it on the screen. If you are connected to the Zoom, you can, and you're a bit shy and don't want to raise your hand, you could put your opinions and input into this Jamboard directly using a post-it. But if you want to raise your hand and make a comment on each of the topics, also great.
Yeah, so maybe we can start answering some questions.
Hi, very nice presentation. And so I'm AJ Science from Leipzig, and one of our objectives is modeling not only the essential biodiversity variable, but also the services that provide the biodiversity. So for that, we are tracing not only all those data, but also models and things like that. One of our main concerns is about provenance. So we have been working on a distributed provenance log system using something like the blockchain, etc. And we are very interested in just how to connect that infrastructure with the point you express about how to guarantee the provenance. That's first point. So probably later or by mail, we can work on that. But it's very important for us to get that information. And so we offer the capability just to provide that provenance. The second point is about the definition, about the models you have been using just to fill the gaps or provide alternatives to the different scenarios in the model, in the file models, and if there are, how to manage the different forks when you are working on many different scenarios and different models that you are applying for the initial CubeSet. That's my second point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so for the first one, I must recognize that the issue of provenance, which is extremely critical, is the most difficult one for us to think about how to handle it. So we started this with a kind of complex model where we were requiring the users to include links to all the data sets that originated the EBV cubes, and links to GitHub, for example, for the models and so on. This was too complex. Very few people, or I would say almost no one, was able to fill all that information. This is the big challenge I think we have in the biodiversity community, or even in science in general. So I really appreciate your offer. I think we need to work on this. At the moment, how we do it is very simple. We have a field, like a term on the description of the methods. There it is an open text where you can include hyperlinks, such as DOIs, links to GitHub, whatever. And the EBV portal now directly recognizes those hyperlinks, and you can click there and go somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, there is here some kind of trade-off that I am still not able to fully decide what direction to take between complexity or easy access to the users, or against having a full provenance. For the second, I'm not fully sure if I understood the full question. The thing is, we are not prescriptive on how the models are developed. The different scientists are developing very different models and using different scenarios and so on. Yeah, so the only thing that we would like to require is that they are documented properly so they can be reproduced, or at least they can be understood, and we can understand also, yeah, what are those products for and what are the limitations. That's I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, okay, we can discuss later. Yeah.
Hiya. First of all, terrific work. Having worked extensively with essential climate variables up until now, I'm particularly interested in what you understand when you talk about uncertainty. The models that you use to fill gaps or that you use to project into scenarios, is that ensemble modeling, and is that where you get your uncertainty from?
With uncertainty, which is something that in biodiversity, we are very well aware of the need to include it with our results, but we very rarely do. So when you develop an EBV data set which comes from modeling, yeah, those models, because of the statistical methods you are using, because of the sparseness of data, and so on, yeah, you have uncertainty in those predictions. This is what I'm referring to. The other part on the different scenarios and so on, I wouldn't classify that as an uncertainties. It is more, yeah, those are the different scenarios. It's not necessarily uncertainty. In the EBV cube, what we want to implement is, and we really want to push for this, is when you calculate an EBV data set, can be, for example, species distributions, please provide some estimates or whatever estimates of uncertainty you can provide for that. And as I said, still challenging because it's not very often done. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I was going to go on the same line as the first intervention. I think the data provenance is very important. It should be somehow guaranteed to be able to go back to the data that has been used to generate the variable. Also, another thing, it would be nice, I don't know if you have thought about that, I'm sure you have, to be that the data cubes somehow included information on the model itself. And if the scripts, for instance, to generate the variable are included somehow there, because you can go and check back how it has been produced. And a third thing is, have you thought about versioning of the variable? Suppose you have, I don't know, a distribution of species which has been modeled out of a provenance data, but then somehow in the future, somebody with more data or with a better algorithm updates this distribution. Will you have a link from the last one to the newer one?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very good questions, all of them. So last one, versioning, we did implement already a versioning system in the EBV portal. And also the version, of course, you need to report for it in the metadata. We still don't have, but this is a very good suggestion. If I'm right, we still don't have this connection, this link from newer versions to older versions, yeah, or from older to newer. We don't have it, but this is something that I guess can be implemented. Traceability and the provenance, yes, as I said before, it is like the big issue that we have. The models, for example, we recommend that the models, like the code that has been used or developed for modeling, is uploaded to a public repository. It can be GitHub, and then you can directly do the link by filling the appropriate term in the metadata. Yeah. So actually, we are facilitating this with a form. You can. I didn't show this, but we also have tools for uploading data where you can fill all that information. But it is very primary, and the reason why it's very primary is what I just said before. That's first we have something very complex. We understood that this was not going to be used, and we decided to have it simpler. But I think this is, from what is coming, this is kind of the one key question we could discuss now. And then you did 3 questions. The third question I forgot. I don't know if I answered all your. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think we could we could start with that discussion on how to improve the provenance. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how we are doing this is via the description of the methods with DOIs. You could, for example, if you are modeling data from GBIF, you can generate a DOI from the data set that you are using in GBIF and then put it there. But as I said, it's very primary at the moment. And another difficulty is that some of the data sets or many of the data sets that are right now in the portal, the data behind is proprietary data and usual problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I can quickly comment on what my colleague has well said, is that I have recently published a paper. It's the Global Reptile Assessment from the IUCN, and we have created multiple raster files for every single species, representing the distribution of these species globally. So what we're trying to do is mobilize this into the EBV data cube using all this structure that we have shown today. And the provenance is captured by the journal. We are forced by the journal to bring the code as well as the raw data into the paper, and that reverberates into what we do in the portal. So
Jutta Buschbaum, I'm representative of Spinach to the CBD, and there I get to know all the great work that GeoBond does for global monitoring, and I'm very impressed about the plans or the concept for a global biodiversity observation system. What I find, well, it's a really great concept. I find that as a collections-based community, we kind of still are missing in this concept. And I find it really great that you come to us and see how we can integrate into the system. So if I understand your talk right, is what your standard does is providing us a more wider context to insert our data into. So we would go into the entity kind of class, our data would go into there, and you would provide us a wider context to integrate the data into.
That's right. Specifically, and this is something I want to emphasize, specifically for contiguous spatiotemporal data. So like, for example, point data, that kind of things, this is not our business, let's call it. They are very good. I mean, we are aiming to kind of fill the gap that, for example, GBIF cannot provide for two reasons. First of all, because of the very broad range of observations we want to provide. And second, because we are trying to mobilize those kind of raster data, spatiotemporal data that also incorporates the scenarios and so on. Yeah. So we wouldn't, for example, although there is a project now, Quentin is here, Miguel also, there is a project where that is going to start exploring how to connect GBIF data with those concepts and so on, among many other things. But that's kind of the idea. Yeah. And in relation to that, also another thing I would like to mention is that in Europe we have another project commissioned by the European Commission, which is called EuropaBond. This project aims to inform to the European Commission how to develop a coordination monitoring center for Europe. And we are basing many of the concepts on these ideas of the EBVs, EBV cubes, and so on.
Yeah, so I was actually going to go back to that first question, which was about what data gaps does the EBV data cube help alleviate. So I think it's worth emphasizing to this crowd that EBVs are definitely for research, but they really have a much stronger policy link than what we're more used to. And the idea that we can potentially standardize some of the scales and resolutions that we work in so that we can compare between regions, between countries, between different taxa much more easily. Whereas previously we've had short-term projects that produce interesting results, but they're not very comparable between papers and things like this. EBVs have a very, very strong link to policy, and policy makers need things to be kept simple and comparable so that, and I think that's the gap for me that EBVs really helps fill. So it can bridge between individual projects a bit better.
Yeah, thank you. Fully agree. This is, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, I fully agree with you as well. I've been participating of the regional nodes meeting of GBIF in Latin America, the Americas, and now in Europe. One of the questions that has been raised by the people that funds the nodes in GBIF is what is the connection between the GBIF data and policy implementation? And I think these EBB cubes can actually fill that space really nicely.
And thank you, Guillaume Body from the French Agency of Biodiversity. I agree with Quentin that the EBVs are a really nice tool to link biodiversity monitoring and public policies. But public policies are often at a certain scale, geographical scale. And I think that it rarely match a grid spatial scale. So when we report to the European Commission, it's at the national or national cross bioregion, and we need one information at this scale. And we cannot report this kind of data using the NetCDF because it's a grid-based. So if we manage to have to enlarge the possibilities to report a geographical scale, we will improve the possibilities to report basically monitoring results that are also designed to answer a certain scale. When you set up a sampling plan, it's for a national scale, a lander scale, a municipality scale, national park scale. It's not grid based, for instance. So
okay, but maybe there is a
really really wondering about that. And
yeah, no, okay. So what the NetCDF provides you is a way of mapping spatial variability in biodiversity attributes over time. Now, the reporting unit that you use is a different thing. Actually, what we promote is that you can use different reporting units on the NetCDF in order to calculate biodiversity indicators. Like, just imagine a golden essential biodiversity variables data cube would be a global one that actually can have enough quality information to be able to report at national and subnational scales also, just, you know, by selecting subspaces within that cube. This is kind of a dream EBV cube. Of course, you cannot get that. But we are also not imposing a specific spatial scale to the EBV cube. Yeah, so you can have global data sets, you can have national data sets. We have actually from subnational data sets to global data sets in the repository. So you can have all that kind of information. What is the problem with the vector data? The problem with vector data is that when you are analyzing biodiversity change, you cannot establish boundaries to characterize, for example, the distributions of one species, unless you have many different distributions of species made by shapefiles, yeah, which is kind of strange. So most of the times, these assessments are done from outputs of models, and those are, in my opinion, best represented with rasters. But as I told you yesterday, we could think in which specific situations, and I think there are very few, in which specific situations we need to incorporate shapefiles or that kind of stuff.
It could be shapefiles, and I have examples that for these species distributions that are based on shapefiles, but it's also some national values. If you estimate the population size, it's at the national value, and the Germany or France, this is the geographical scale, and this is
but that is the geographic scale of the reporting unit. Yeah, it's not necessarily of the underlying data. Yeah.
No, that's the result of the monitoring program, and the monitoring program is designed to answer to this question. So we don't have a lower scale answer. We don't know the population, for instance, of wolf at lower scale than the national one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
this requires a separate discussion, probably. Yeah, thank you for your comment.
what's the reference system used in the cubes?
Yeah,
I mean,
so
is it variable or
no,
it-
it's yeah, just answer.
because data cubes done at a very local scale? I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, thank you. So the future for this project, for this endeavor, is to have a single grid where the multiple resolutions are embedded into one another. So if you, for example, are interested in a particular pixel at a very fine resolution somewhere in the planet, you could immediately query all the information from all the dimensions, all these variables across time and space. So this is the beauty of working with a cube. As it is now, we are working with multiple reference systems, right? Because the data comes in from different persons, from different research projects. We're trying to accommodate, but we're trying to move into some sort of harmonic way of displaying this data, while we also have to respect the original information. It's a tough balance we are playing, but
That's right.
absolutely, absolutely. And there was thinking also about interpretation of the world, right? How do we interpret? Do we use hexagons, which might address this problem? But it's a challenge, and we're continuously evolving our thinking on how to do this properly.
Yeah, just to complement very quickly, at the beginning, we started thinking about trying to using SG84 for all data sets. We decided not to. Now it is totally flexible. You just need to specify which one you are using. That's it. Yeah.
So I don't think we can completely ignore biology altogether and expect one size fits all as well. Because
no, I agree.
I know there's one Steller sea eagle off the coast of North America where it doesn't belong, and every birder who goes there wants it on their life list. They all put it on iNaturalist. There's almost as many grid squares filled in Maine and Canada as there are in the home range of Steller sea eagle in Kamchatka. Because nobody records in Kamchatka, of course. So yeah, knowledge of biology is super important when trying to interpret these, knowledge a bit of how the data are collected and the sorts of sources of data and things. So we can't completely get away from that and make it completely automated without having some knowledge of biology.
Yeah, I fully agree. And this is why I think it's more important to have this kind of consistent way of combining the different or documenting the different data sets in a way that then you can combine them. This is the user who would decide how to do it, but we are not imposing all that kind of things. I think it makes, at the beginning it was kind of the idea, but we quickly abandoned that. Yeah. Okay.
Just you're talking about raster data and being able to scale, which makes a lot of sense. And you explicitly said that point data is kind of like out of scope. But if our communities work together, that point data would need to be integrated by the coordinates into the raster context. Is that, do I understand this right?
Correct. And this is the kind of discussion that we really would like to have on this traceability and provenance and some. Absolutely, yeah.
It's very similar to what the climate community has been doing, right? You have weather stations spread around the world, and the density varies from place to place. You have countries like India who are really well covered, but you have places like Bolivia, where my home country, where you have 16 weather stations covering 1 million square kilometers, and those interpolations are gridded. So that perhaps is connected to the uncertainty question, you know, how much you can trust this information versus the other, depending on many factors like topography, for instance.
So there are algorithms we can use to fit round circles into square boxes, and there are many different ways to do it. And you also have to look at the spatial resolution of the radius of uncertainty and things. So yeah, we're working on that. That will be part of our new project on this.
I'm not worried about models. I mean, you can interpolate everything. I mean, I'm coming from the statistics side. I know exactly what we do. So I'm just really thinking kind of about the more the raw data stage. So you have a data point and you need to insert that one into the system. And what you do with that, go ahead and model the hell out of it. But first, this data point needs to be very well integrated into the system. And I understand the questions about provenance, because when you go to data points, you really want to be sure that this one of the 16 stations in Bolivia is really there for modeling the rest of the millions of square kilometers. So yeah, so that was the question about more the data level and not the modeling one.
But this can also all evolve. So we are proposing this standard. We are already using it and trying to promote it. This can all evolve. Perhaps in the future, one approach could be that. So you, in reality, you integrate in the same kind of data cube the modeled outputs with the inputs. Yeah, but maybe, I don't know. This is all is open. So, yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And also,
there was a question there. Yeah.
I just want to make a quick comment on that. There is still a vast data assets that have not been collected with GPS that are in the museums, in the collections, herbariums around the world. And how do you first retrospectively georeference that the community here has been working on this problem for many years with point radius approach and so on. So this also has some implications on the transition from this information, the point data, into a gridded system, because it adds some uncertainty. So this is not a solved problem. We need to carefully think about this, right? How to do this properly.
Yeah, I'm worrying a little when we discuss to link directly the raw data with the output, because there is a huge amount of statistical work in between and sampling plans, and one of the differences with the climate community is that what we measure on the ground is not the variable we want to estimate. We measure occurrences, but we want distribution. It's two different things. And it's not with the collection of occurrence that you necessarily have the distribution. If you want to have a population abundance, you just measure quantities of individuals on the ground, and there are really, really big difference in the two. So I would not go too far to just link the two, because there are so many biases in ecological data, and sometimes we make them in purpose just to fit some work, some field work, and to please sometimes observers. Just
yeah, thank you.
You're bringing up the issue of uncertainty and adding that sort of data into raster data, and something I don't think our community has really looked at well enough. Too often we're adding the point, the geocode, into the raster and assuming that was where it is. But if the uncertainty encompasses half a dozen or 9 or whatever it is rasters, then should we be weighting these? Should we be doing some sort of method, taking all those rasters and agreeing to them? Or how do we do that? And it's something that we've never really worked on in the modelling community in Australia. And I don't know, I've talked about this before, and I know a lot of other people, but it's something that we really need to consider in putting our data into raster format.
Mm-hmm.
I need to make the comment. Many years ago, when I was a student of Stan Bloom, we were working on this problem with the Berkeley crowd. And what we did at that point, GARP was one of the modeling techniques at that particular point in time. We randomly select points from the circle that is the uncertainty point radius circle that is created. We randomly selected points, and we evaluated the effect of this random selection at different buffer size on the modeling output. How much variability do you get? And this is also connected with the resolution of the data, right? The environmental co-variables that you use for your modeling. So I think the remote sensing community has been extremely useful here because they have advanced the availability of information that we have now at hand, that we could do so many more things. If I had, for instance, MODIS, Landsat, all these Sentinel information with the same thinking that I was having at that time, perhaps my approach to do these tests would have been different. But I think this is still exciting problem to tackle.
So I wouldn't worry that much about statistical uncertainty, because there are approaches to work on that. And I think we just don't know enough about it. So I looked into that in the forensic genetic context about how do we deal with uncertainty. And there is a whole field out there of statistics that exactly does that. And we just don't know enough about it. It's about posterior predictive distributions and checking your model and seeing how much can you actually do with your model, how much information is in your data. And with that, I think we can get pretty far. We just need to integrate that kind of into our workflows.
Yeah, yeah, Quentin, I would like to comment on that later also.
Yeah, it's just the comment that the biases and the uncertainty are actually one of the things we should be creating as indicators from this, because that's one of the things we need to point out to policymakers, because they're the ones who end up supporting the creation of data as well. Exactly.
This is exactly the direction I wanted to point. So from this perspective of the essential biodiversity data sets that are actually delivered for policymaking, what is important is to report on that uncertainty to the extent that we are able to do that. Sometimes we cannot, but sometimes yes, in a way that then those data sets, since they are going to be used for as indicators of biodiversity change, then you can have some kind of guess of uncertainty. And we also did some thinking around that. Often numerical estimates of uncertainty might be difficult, yeah. But at least some categories of uncertainty could be included in the future in this kind of thinking. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I'm not going to talk about uncertainty. So if anybody else has a question about that, I will change a little bit the subject. My question is more, actually there are two. So when you submit data to the EBB portal, do you need to share not also the EVV, like for instance, I'm working on species distribution models and I can share like a stack of, I don't know, thousands of species distribution models. Do I also need to share, or do you ask for people to share, I don't know, the DOI of the occurrences that they use, the code in a certain format so that other people, so that it's reproducible and other people can do the same? And well, I don't know, you've mentioned that you're not asking for any special georeference system, but that makes me feel like into my second question, which is, okay, so who is the user of this data? Are you thinking of policymakers that would take all the data cubes that overlap to the country that they are working in and then do some intersections and say, okay, this is the species that live in my country or are distributed in my country? Because if that's the case, then that person would need to, I don't know, reproject some of the layers in those data cubes. So I wonder how is that link?
Okay, yeah. So to your first question, what we do is to recommend that the DOIs of the original data are reported with the data, and also the models, for example, you can do it in several ways. If you have a paper already on that, you can put the DOI of the paper. If you have DOIs for the data, you can put in the same place the DOIs for the data. So you can write there several lines of the provenance. This is how we came out to do this, because we really wanted to facilitate that people do this. And if we made this more complex and more comprehensive, we know that people will not do it. And this is the question we still have. Yeah. So it is not mandatory. It is kind of best practice. To your second question, who are the users? So in my opinion, the main users are trained professionals working for agencies that then estimate biodiversity change. So it has a very strong policy target, but it is not like for the policymakers that wouldn't be able to use that data. What we do and what we are trying to provide in the EBV portal is also, and this is still very in its infancy, yeah? But what we would like to do in the future is to provide kind of a dashboard where you use a data set there, you use a country, or actually we already have it for countries. You take the shapefile of the country, either implemented already in the infrastructure as we have, or you can upload your own shapefile, and then you get results, for example, of reduction on species distributions over time and that kind of things. This is something we are working on. Right now, it's not like the main goal of the project, because we want to focus on other higher priorities at the moment. But it's also challenging, because depending on what data set you are analyzing, the kind of analysis for biodiversity change makes sense or not. Yeah, so you cannot use the same statistics for summarizing biodiversity change for all the data sets. And this is somewhere where we are kind of stuck, but would like to address in the future. Yeah. So then you would have kind of the two blocks of users. You would also access to those people that are less expert in managing data, but still can very easily select, okay, I have a species distribution here, how the extent of distribution of those species have changed over time in my country.
For instance, our safeguards environmental specialists working in a multilateral funding organization like the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank, and are looking for a particular area and wondering if your investment portfolio will have some impact on this particular area, you could actually use this future dashboard to query the information and understand what are the trends in that particular place. That could be an interesting client that we would like to reach out.
Yeah. So so we are in the coffee break. What I would like to do now, Quentin, I'll give you the word in 1 second, so people can. Meanwhile, I mean, we can stay here longer. Whoever wants to stay longer. People that is interested in this project and want to contribute, perhaps please get in contact with Miguel. We now need to start thinking about whether it makes any sense to have a group within that week that is connected to the initiative we are promoting, which is at the same time connected to GeoBond and so on. So how this could work. So whoever, if you're interested in that, please contact Miguel. I also saw for the people in Zoom, I'm very sorry, nobody was monitoring the chat. I think I will try to, okay, you both are monitoring the chat. We'll try to answer all the questions, and and whoever want to take the coffee, just please feel free. And meanwhile, we can stay here, Quentin.
Just very small response to Janina, that yes, you can make data cubes in all sorts of resolutions, temporal and spatial, but in reality, if you're not creating it with what the policymakers want, and if you're not following the same resolutions as the environmental layers, then it's not going to be any use to anybody. So we want interoperability, very tight interoperability with the environmental layers. So they are actually going to follow along fairly standard lines, I think.
So what I interpreted, I agree with you. I agree. I think we should all be using the same grid. and trying to include our data or like match it at least with some sort of grid. But if you're not asking for people when they submit their data to the portal, if you're not asking for them to submit it in a particular resolution, then it's on the person that will use the data at the end to translate it into or transform it into whatever format they need. So you're hoping that.
Yeah, I think
So
this is less and less of a issue in my opinion, and also we cannot impose grids. Among other things,
No.
because in Europe, for example, we have Inspire directive. You need to use that one, and it doesn't. It's something that you wouldn't use for other parts of the world. If you're working globally, you would use WGS 84. You know, it's
Yeah, I was just thinking of, okay, the next person that is using this, how to streamline the work of the person that it's next using.
okay. Mhm.
And also, sorry, since I'm holding the microphone, I'll take advantage. As a scientist, I think some of the things that we really need to do better is on how to report what we are doing to allow other people to do exactly the same process. So in order to ensure reproducibility. I don't think we're very good at that. Even if a paper is published and you cite the paper and you include the DOI, you read into the methodology, it's very well explained, but then you cannot reproduce it because your cleaning of the occurrence data was different to, you know, and you're not reporting that, or sometimes the code, some parts of the code is accessible. For instance, the modeling function, many people make it available, but all the data prep that got into that model is not shared. So I also worry a little bit about only pointing to include the DOIs and the papers. So I wonder if there's other ideas or other solutions where we can reach to people being able to reproduce whatever EVVs or whatever models we're publishing.
I fully agree with you, and I fully agree with the need of going that direction. In our experience, mobilizing data sets is that many teams are not there yet, and we cannot be so prescriptive, because if not, this is ended. Yeah, so there is no there will be no use of this, because you're putting there a very, very strong barrier. Yeah, so what we can do is to provide recommendations, perhaps put some kind of maybe we can think in the future of putting some kind of, those are exemplary data sets. Yeah, those are like, this is green, this is really golden data set because it contains all of that. But being prescriptive or putting there a barrier to those data sets that don't comply to that, and with that, it wouldn't be really, really problematic, because most people at this moment is not. So it's more an evolving thing.
I think a good idea is to have maybe being part of the standard, have a field or a class about quality, and not have it prescriptive, but have a slot where then at a later time we can put into different measures of quality. How often has this been reused? Has it been tested? How often is it cited? Have other people said, yes, I believe in that data too? So these, just to have the slot there to allow people to put in data, and that I've never looked into the data quality standard of TDWG, but I mean, that seems to me going into that direction.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Yeah.
Okay. If there is no more outstanding comments, I would.
Yes. Just out of curiosity on the technical side, this can grow very huge. So what's the technology behind what the infrastructure? Just can you give us a hint on that?
So currently we have a few projects funded for the next 4 years in the lab. We have Natura Connect, we have Europa One, we have Wild E that just started, and we are also part of the consortium that got the ETC Biodiversity for Europe. So funding wise, we're okay. The the main issue is people, right? We are a small team, we're overworked, and we need help. So the more we could engage with this community to get support and guidance on aspects that we need. For instance, the taxonomy issues that we haven't even touched today are issues that we need to figure it out. How do we do this, right? And you are the ones who could guide us in that direction. So yeah, that's I think the status of our infrastructure, and we are backed up by iDiv, right? The computational capacity and infrastructure of 3 universities in Germany.
Miguel, I don't know if you hear me. I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, Miguel, Néstor, Christian, really happy to see you. And just briefly on this reproducibility things, I just want to share the fact that we are coordinating an EBV operational pilot who is concretely trying to focus on reproducibility and accessibility. So for sure, there is a lot of complexity and we can't make a lot of things for now, but we have something who is working and we describe it on another session in TEDWG. So please don't hesitate to see it. I put it on the chat. And we are working with Guillaume on that too in France. So having both possibilities to share something like an EBV data cube or something like that, but also try to share raw data sets, derived data sets, and algorithm and workflow using community-driven approach using bioinformatics standards notably. So I think both point of view are really complementary. If we want to have a really clear landscape of all the things that can be done in biodiversity, I think the EBV data cube is something we can mobilize quite rapidly and easily without asking to have access to data, code, and things like that. And in the meantime, the other way is really focusing on reproducibility, provenance tracking, and things like that. So I really think that both point of view can answer a lot of questions we raised today, and I'm happy to work on that on the future years. The next
thank you, Ivan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I attended with a lot of interest your talk, of course, and we spoke about this several times. So yes, I think it would be really nice to have a pilot where we can really demonstrate all that connection from the original data to the reproducible workflow up to the NetCDF cube. Yeah, and about the question of infrastructure. Yes, right now it's all on iDiv servers, which is, as Miguel said, supported by universities. Of course, at some point we may reach limitations. We can think, but one important thing is we are developing the standard not only for the EBBcube portal. Yeah, so we are developing, or for the GeoBond portal. This standard we want to start thinking now about how it can be actually retrieved and distributed through other platforms. So this is not one standard for one infrastructure. It is really can be used for in the French-born infrastructures, or it can be retrieved from Data One. And as I said before, we are working with in one of the projects with ELTR, also to make connections there with LTR. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Maybe we can speak during the coffee if you don't mind. Yeah, and although the coffee is probably already gone, but yeah, thanks a lot for attending. And as I said, whoever is interested, please contact Miguel.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Thank you.